But hold on before I do, because I think I still have two people's exams. Melissa, are you here? Here you are. Did you get the email that I re-forwarded? I replied to the original.
I never got that. I've been having
It's
problems
happened
all semester.
It's happened about half dozen students.
Really? Okay.
But I re-forwarded it this morning. Yeah, I replied on November 7th, the day you sent it. So check your email again.
All right.
And then Katie, I've got yours. So pick up again with Donne's Meditation 17 on 835. So where we left off the other day, it's about 10 lines down, where Donne is talking about the church is Catholic, universal. Her actions, when they affect one person, they affect everyone within the church. Okay? So notice if you're an atheist, it doesn't matter to you because you're not connected to the body of Christ. Okay? And he's talking about death. Why? Because the meditation begins with the tolling of the bells. And we talked about how bell tolling may be a means of indicating when someone has died. So, talking about death, humanity are like books in a library. And I'm going to pick up in that line where he says, God employs several translators. Some pieces are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice, but God's hand is in every translation. Now, we've seen that kind of language before in other poems, right? We saw it in The Wanderer. We saw it in Beowulf, that death comes by many different means. It's a truism. It's not something that needs to be proven. But Donne says God's hand is in every death. So, the individual who gets shot outside a bar at night, it's like the individual doing the shooting is the agent of God at that moment. The individual who gets washed away in a flood, the flood is God working into human history at that moment, so to speak. But God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves again for that library where every book shall lie open to one another. And that's kind of where we left off the other day. As therefore, the bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation to come, so this bell calls us all. He's talking about somebody standing in the rope room, ringing the bell, calling people to church. Notice the bell is doing two things. It does call the preacher to church, in other words, it's time to get ready, but it's also calling the parishioners, time to come to service. Okay? So he says, this bell, the bell that Donne hears ringing outside his chamber door, calls all of us. How? It's calling us to do what? To be mindful of death. But how much more me? No longer all of us, me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness. Okay? So he's using that generic us, and then he singles down, but my time is counting down. So the bell ringing is much more particular to me. There was a contention as far as a suit, in which both piety and dignity, religion and estimation were mingled, which of the religious orders should ring to prayers first in the morning? As far as a suit means, and it actually became a lawsuit, essentially. And it was determined that they should ring first that rose earliest. Kind of a no-brainer, common sense. If we understand aright the dignity of this bell that tolls for our evening prayer, notice what the speaker is saying there. Notice what Donne is saying there. He knows the bell that's tolling is tolling people to come to church for evening prayers, vespers, right? He knows this bell isn't actually for me. I'm not so far gone that the people sitting around my bed are saying, oh, poor John. He's getting ready to kick the bucket. Okay, go back to the beginning of that. If we understand aright the dignity of this bell that tolls for our evening prayer, we would be glad to make it ours by rising early. That is, by getting up in plenty of time for this evening prayer, so that we're not late. In this application, that it might be ours as well as his, maybe it's not ringing for evening prayer, whose indeed it is. Maybe it is ringing for somebody who's dying. Okay, so what's the application? Let's say the bell is ringing for Fred. Fred is nearly dead. Okay? Maybe we should get up early. We should hasten to the ringing of that bell, calling us to prayers, to church. Okay? That it might be ours as well as his. That is, the bell might be ringing us to prayers for church, but it might also be ringing to tell us Fred is about to die. And that we would make that application ours. We would make that ringing of the bell be, it's not Fred that's getting ready to die. It's Ted that's getting ready to die. Or Devon, or Landon. Okay? The bell doth toll for him that thinks it doth. Think about that again. The bell that tolls, the bell doth toll for him that thinks it does. Put modern English. What's the most important word there? Thinks. Thinks. There is no good or evil, but for him that thinks it so. Okay? I mean, just read St. Paul on fasting, for example. Or on eating stuff sacrificed to idols. If you don't know that it's sacrificed, go ahead and eat. If you do know that it's sacrificed, don't eat. It all depends on how you approach it, on how your mind understands what's going on. So, if you hear the bell ringing and you think it's ringing for my death, what does that mean? Louder, Mary?
It's ringing for your death.
Okay, so what do you then do? Prepare for it. Get ready for it. I told my Lord of the Rings Harry Potter students the other day, I think all 7 of the Harry Potter novels are about one thing. Ultimately, they have one theme. How to die well. In other words, how to prepare to die. Because we see all kinds of people who don't die well. Some of them are there at the beginning of the books. They're already characters in the novel. Nearly Headless Nick and all the other ghosts. None of them died well. Meaning, none of them were prepared for death. And we hear Dumbledore say at the end of the first book, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. In other words, if up here you are ready to die, death isn't something to be feared. Death isn't something to be shunned, which is why Lord Voldemort fears death. His mind's a little scattered. It's not well organized. Okay? Donne is talking here about, you hear that bell ringing, you better start putting stuff together in your mind. You better start putting things where they belong. In other words, prioritizing. And though it intermit again, that is, though there's a pause between the tolling of the bell, yet from that minute that occasion wrought upon him, he is united to God. What is that occasion that he's talking about? The first hearing of the bell tolling. If he thinks the bell doth toll for him, and we're talking about someone within the tradition that Donne is talking about, what does that person do? prepare for it. How? Like Dylan Thomas's speaker, and do not go gentle into that good night? Rail, rail against the howling, against the darkness of the night? No. You unite yourself to God. You, as Landon said, you pray. Right? Who casts not up his eye to the sun when it arises? If you're out early in the morning and it's dark and you see the sunrise, who doesn't draw his eye to the sunrise? Who takes his eye off from a comet when that breaks out? Who bends not his ear to any bell which upon any occasion rings? We've had several times in this class where someone's phone is rung. You know, and from my perspective, all eyes go to the direction of the phone. Imagine if that ringing phone was the sound of a bell, like a big church bell. Okay? Who can remove it from that bell which is passing a piece of himself out of this world? What does he mean by a piece of himself? Is it because he's united to the first ringing of the bell so that now whenever he hears a ringing of the bell, it's a gentle reminder, uh-oh, you too must die? No man is an island, entire of itself. You familiar with Simon and Garfunkel? One of their greatest songs, The Boxer. What's the boxer say? I am a rock. I am an island. Okay? I think, because of how literate those two were, they're talking about this. Okay? No man is an island entire of itself. Meaning what? None of us is what? Alone? Okay. What else? Bingo. First word, not independent. Independent. Notice that word. What does this mean if you break it into independent? And then what does it mean if you have but then you have to change the spelling of this one to that. What does pendant mean? Some of you are wearing them around your necks. What does it mean? Find this thing. Okay. What is that cross doing? Oh, my glasses. What are they doing? They're hanging. That's what pendant means. It hangs. Okay? But it hangs from something. Something else supports it. Dependent out of. Hanging out of something. Independent essentially means self-supporting. Hanging from nothing. Right? No man is an island entire of itself. None of us are this. Independent. How do you know? None of you are immaculately conceived. None of you just sprung into existence out of your own free will. Moreover, none of you can live without other people. You didn't produce that electricity. You didn't produce the paper you're writing on or the phones that are in your pockets. Okay? You didn't produce, probably, the food you ate this morning. You didn't grow the coffee beans for the coffee you drank. You didn't dig the petroleum out of the ground that you put refined into your car to get here. We are all entirely dependent on others. Which is why, if something happened to make that structure of dependency break down, we would all become a basket of deplorables. Think, if you know what this means, think if one of these really happened, what that would create. Anybody know what an EMP is? Electromagnetic pulse. Okay? If North Korea or the Iranians or some other crazy person wanted to bring the United States to a halt, what could they do?
Cut off communication with electronic pulse.
Okay, cut off communications with an electronic pulse. How? Detonate a nuclear warhead. I think it is something like 50 miles above Omaha, Nebraska. What would that do? It would shut down our electrical grid. What does that mean? You'd have none of this for months, minimum. And without any of this, what else would you not have? Food? Water? Water's pumped by electricity, folks. These, this is my son's, it's already dead. These would be dead. Landline telephones would be dead. Television. What would we immediately be thrust into? The middle of the 19th century. We would go in a matter of moments back about 150 years. What would everybody have to start being able to do? Start a fire? Unless you have enough gasoline at home to use it for that. Find your own food. Defend yourself. Hope you have enough ammo stored up, you Y2Kers. All that kind of stuff, okay? All that goes to show how dependent we are on not only people, but stuff. Electrical stuff. Say it's not an EMP. Say the sun just decides one day to throw out a big old huge solar flare like it did in 1857. Called the Carrington event. It melted, literally melted telegraph wires. Okay? All our satellites would go offline, all our electrical, happened actually back in 86 or so. Ontario blacked out because of a huge solar flare. Parts of the East Coast did. Okay? So, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. What's the continent and main? Humanity. We're all one. Notice what he talked about as the church. The church is universal Catholic. It is all what? One body. And those who are members of the church are parts of the body. Let's say all of you are good Christians. You're all up there. You belong. You're part of the brain and all that. I'm like the little toenail or the corn on the side of the big toe or something like that. All right? If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were. What's the point Donne is getting to? He hasn't said it yet, but he's getting to it. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. I'm from California. If I went to the beach, I would go to Santa Cruz. Okay? Big old storm comes in. You can stand there on the coast and you can watch parts of the cliff sides wash away into the sea. What happened when those cliff sides washed away into the sea? The North American continent grew a little bit less. And every time those storms come in, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Every man's death, any man's death, diminishes me. Why? Because I am involved in mankind. We're coming up to Christmas. Famous novella, written in 1844, I think, by Charles Dickens. What novella am I talking about?
Christmas Carol.
The Christmas Carol. What's it about? It's when three ghosts visit Scrooge. What's it about? It's about Scrooge learning this lesson. He has to learn. He is connected. Not to the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas future. But to what? The people in his past, the people in his present, and the people in his future. So what does he learn? What does he see when he goes into the past? He sees himself as a solitary youth when his father kicks him out and sends him off to boarding school and doesn't want him to come home for Christmas until the one year when his sister comes to get him and he's sitting there all alone in the school and she says he's different now, father's changed, and he gets ready to go home. And then we see him later, a little bit older, when he's working, he has friends. We see him a little bit later when he's engaged and his beloved says, you don't love me, you love money. And then we see him in the present. And what does he see? Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit and his family. Bob Cratchit, who he's a cold-hearted you-know-what to. What else does he see? His nephew, Fred. And his nephew, Fred, says what? Every year. Merry Christmas, Uncle. Won't you come celebrate with us? Bah, humbug. What else does he see in the present? You remember the scene where the ghost takes him to essentially like an underpass? It's more like a sewer. And he opens his robes. What does he see? Innocence and wonder. Children who are orphans on the street. Okay? Then what does he see in the future? No one remembers him. They're laughing and celebrating because old Scrooge has died and he never gave away anything in his life. So the charwomen and the street buyers get to go through his belongings. Okay? What's he learning? I am connected to these children on the streets. There is no, what's the phrase Scrooge uses when the two elderly gentlemen come to his counting house and ask him if he will donate to a society? Are there no poorhouses? Are there no workhouses? Is the government no longer in effect? That is, do we not have welfare? And they say, yes, yes, and yes, the government is still in effect. Then let them take care. Oh, but there needs to be more. Then let the surplus population die. What's surplus mean? Yeah. We don't need them. It's more than we need. It's kind of like Voldemort saying, kill the spare, in the fourth book. Any man's death diminishes me. Who is any man? Make it more particular. Rather than just, any man out there. Who is any man that you see today that you don't have regular contact with, that you don't speak to, etc.? Strangers. What kind of strangers? Is Doug talking about walking by students in the hallway that you don't know? I don't think so. And that's not what Dickens is talking about.
Strangers that you know that you have neglected.
Okay, could be that. How about you getting onto Interstate 24 or off of Interstate 24 at Old Fort Parkway? What is there almost every day? Or, let me rephrase that. Who is there? Somebody standing there holding a sign. Okay? What are they doing? Begging. How do you know they're homeless? You don't. You don't? Might they not be? They might not be. I've heard stories that people from the farm, the commune over in Woodbury, whatever it is, will carpool over here, raise money, take it back. Okay? Are they homeless? No, they have a place to live. Okay? I don't know whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter. Donne's point is, if one of those people on the side of that highway dies, unbeknownst to you, your life lessens. You are the less because of that individual's death. Any man's death diminishes me. Why? Because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never sin to know for whom the bells tolls. It tolls for thee. You hear the bell ringing? Don't ask somebody who died. Why? You died. The bell is tolling for you. If you hear the ringing of the bell, it means that's for you. It becomes what? You familiar with this? Exactly. A memento mori, which means what? Reminder of death. Several of you right now are in the Shakespeare course. Intro to Shakespeare. Are you reading Hamlet, or have you read Hamlet?
The first half.
Okay.
So 16.
Well, you're going to come up to Act 5, and Act 5 begins what's usually called the clown scene, the gravedigger scene, where the gravediggers are digging the grave for, sorry, I'm going to give this away in case you're not familiar with it, Ophelia's dead. Okay? Whether she kills herself or not is exactly clear, but she's dead. She's become unliving. Okay? And so we have the gravedigger scene, where they're sitting there digging a grave, and they're pulling up bones. Because Denmark is a very small land, they have to reuse graves. It's the ultimate recycling. Unless you're into Soylent Green, if you're familiar with that at all. A couple of people are. Right? The entire scene there serves as this, a reminder of death. Because the talk that they talk about is Alexander, well, this might have been Alexander the Great, this skull, or even this clay, this mud. It might be the emperor. It could be a king, as well as a nobody. Right? So when you see Renaissance portraits, and you have somebody dressed out in all his finery, I mean, look online, portrait of Erasmus. Erasmus from Rotterdam, great Renaissance scholar. There's Erasmus. He's all decked out in his robes and everything. And over off to the side, there's a skull. All these Renaissance portraits have the skull. Why? Because I might look like this right now. Time comes to all of us. This is what we all look like, ultimately. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bells tolls. It tolls for thee. Neither can we call this a begging of misery. Call this. What's the this? Taking that the tolling of the bell is for you. He says, that's not a begging of misery. In other words, that's not, oh, John Donne's just being morbid again, seeing death everywhere, which is what some people say about him. No, it's not a borrowing of misery. As though we were not miserable enough of ourselves, but must fetch in more from the next house and taking upon us the misery of our neighbors. No, truly, it were an excusable covetousness if we did. That is, he's saying, it would be a good thing if we tried to take on the misery of our neighbors. After all, Christ tells his followers to do what? Bear one another's burdens. No man, truly it were an excusable covetousness if we did. Why? For affliction is a treasure, and scarce any man hath enough of it. Affliction is a treasure? Oh, then Hillary Clinton is really rich today, right? Think of the affliction she has. She just, came out of her cocoon, burrow, whatever you want to call it, the other day and said, I've just kind of felt like curling up in bed with a good book and never leaving the house again. I mean, think of the poor woman's life. Everything in her life from 1992 until November 8th, 2016 was aimed at what? That big brass ring, presidency. Missed it by that much, so to speak. Okay? Affliction is a treasure. How many of you feel like affliction is a treasure when you are afflicted? I don't mean afflicted you get a bad grade. I mean somebody in your family falls really ill. You get blindsided by something, hit by a car. Something horrible happens in your life. And you go, woohoo! Yay for me! 2 years ago in January 1st. 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago, January 1st, when my wife was diagnosed with cancer. Woo! Greatest news in the world. No, not really. Not really at all. So what does he mean? Affliction is a treasure, and scarce any man hath enough of it. Do all of you have enough treasure? Affliction? Enough misery in your life? Do you need to be more miserable? I'm looking at Devon, and he's sitting over there, and he's got me for 2 classes. Imagine that. In every class I look at him, he's just kind of wilting away. You don't have enough affliction yet. He's going to take me for a 3rd. Some people are sick that way. No man hath affliction enough that is not matured and ripened by it. In other words, affliction does what? What's the, is it a Kelly Clarkson song? Look at that. John Donne and Kelly Clarkson. How's that for a metaphysical conceit, What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Do you think Hillary Clinton will come out stronger after this election?
Maybe.
I think she will. I don't think she'll ever run for president again. She'll be too old. Okay? No man hath affliction enough that is not matured and ripened by it, and made fit for God by that affliction. In other words, what does affliction become? Or maybe what's another word for affliction? What's one of the words, for example, St. Paul uses?
Hardship.
Close. What's the purpose of the hardship? It's refining. It's purifying. What's it doing? From what we saw in the ecstasy the other day, it's burning off that dross. Okay? If a man carry treasure in bullion, what's he talking about? You go to Kroger and you've got a big bag that you're hanging over your shoulder, in which case you're going to be walking like this because of what's in it. And in that bag you've got 3 bars of gold. Gold is really heavy. That's why you're walking like this. And you go up to the checkout clerk at Kroger and you're buying, I don't know, $28.73 worth of something, and you hand them a bar of gold. What's going to happen?
You can't get change back.
You can't get change back, because if you're a smart checkout clerk, what do? Shove it down your pocket. See you later. That gold bar is what if you go to a store?
Useless.
It's useless. Okay? So if a man carry treasure in bullion, or in a wedge of gold, and have none coined into current money, his treasure will not defray him as he travels. Tribulation is treasure in the name of it, but it is not current money in the use of it. In other words, tribulation in its nature is like gold bullion. So what do you have to do?
Turn it into currency.
You have to turn it into currency. You have to turn that tribulation into something that is what? Exchangeable, usable by you. So how do you do that? It is not currency, current money in the use of it, except we get nearer and nearer our home, heaven, by it. How do you get nearer and nearer to heaven? By affliction.
It should draw you closer to God.
Right? Should draw you closer to God. Another way of putting that is it should draw you what to the earth? away from it. What did the wanderer say? What was the wanderer almost entirely about? What was life on this earth like? What word did he use repeatedly? Lana, fleeting, lone, transitory. What happens to the people who think he who dies with the most toys wins? You're an idiot. You can't do anything with those toys. Which is why the wanderer, again, says, the person who strews gold in his brother's grave is doing what with that gold? Nothing. Gold, according to the wanderer, Beowulf, the Lay of the Last Survivor, is meant for what? Bingo. It's meant to be spent. It's meant to be distributed. Okay? Tribulation. Another man may be sick too. That is, another person may have tribulation and may be sick to death. And this affliction may lie in his bowels as gold in a mine and be of no use to him. What use is gold in a mine? Nothing. Till you dig it out and do what? Turn it into currency. So what use is affliction in your body if you don't do anything with it? If you don't turn that affliction into something? But this bell, bing, 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 that tells me of his affliction. The guy who's dying, who has a mine of gold. This bell that tells me of his affliction digs out and applies that gold to me. How? Because he's taking that other person's affliction and he's turning it into what? Currency. What's the currency? It's all up here, folks. What kind, though? The bell is tolling for me. That's the currency. It's turning that affliction into thinking, this isn't all there is. There's more. Okay, if this isn't all there is, and there's more, what should I do? Maybe I should prepare for that more. Hamlet's speech, to be or not to be, is all about death. Whether 'tis nobler, he says, to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or with a bare bodkin to quell them. Take a knife and kill yourself. But there's the rub. To dream, perchance to sleep, no more. But what happens when you dream? Are all your dreams wonderful? Are all your dreams beautiful? Full of joy? No, because we all have nightmares at times. And the problem that Hamlet's dealing with is we don't know what lies beyond. And so he says it's the fear of that undiscovered country from whose bourne no man returns that makes cowards of us all. Cowards. It's why we don't kill ourselves. We don't know what's beyond door number 3. Now, if you're Christians, you do say you know what's beyond door number 3. But if you're not, you don't know. Unless you're an atheist, in which case you say, there's nothing. There's nothing there. You just dissolve, that's it. Well, if you just dissolve, that's it. Why are people afraid of death? It's what we were talking about in the Harry Potter class the other day. Death is what? Unknown. Socrates talked about this way back in Plato's dialogues. What is it we really fear when we fear death? The unknown. The unknown. Yet none of you have a fear right now of leaving this class in about 45 minutes and walking out this door. Do you know what's outside this door? Melissa, Natalie says yes, stairs. Do you really know what's right outside this door? Based upon what do you know that? Because you came in that door, right? A little over an hour ago. Almost an hour ago. You came in, you saw what was out there, now you're an ear. But you don't know what's out there. You think you know on the basis of prior experience. But what if something has changed from every other day that you've walked in this class? What if there's now someone standing out there with a semi-automatic who just woke up this morning and went batshit crazy? Yeah, it kind of makes you pause and wonder, doesn't it? Happened at Virginia Tech several years ago. 31 kids went to school, 31 kids went home in coffins. Okay? They didn't know that was going to happen. They didn't wake up that morning and go, wahoo, today I'm going to get shot and killed. Better call mom now. Nope. They had no idea. Those 5 Dallas cops, when they went to work last summer, they had no idea. They had an inkling. Why? Because they're cops. It's part of the job. They didn't know they were going to get ambushed. Okay? Or the cop just the other day, cop yesterday, pulled out of his car and gets the crap beaten out of him until some innocent bystander pulls up, sees this guy just wailing on his cop, and tells the guy, stop, or I'm going to shoot you. The cop's yelling, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. And the guy finally does. He's got a concealed permit, and he kills him. Okay? Cop didn't expect that. We tend to make assumptions based upon prior experience, but those assumptions don't always hold true, do they? We have to turn that tribulation into currency. So, but this spell that tells me of his affliction digs out and applies that goal to me. If by this consideration of another's danger, I take mine into contemplation, and so secure myself by making my recourse to my God. And we're back at the end of the wanderer, who is our only security. It's the same thing, almost, that the wanderer says. You want real security? You're not going to find it here. You're not going to find it in political leaders. You're not going to find it in social leaders. You're not going to find it on social media or your computers or your money or your bank accounts. You got to look elsewhere. Both authors are saying. But notice what Donne's getting at. What do we have to do, therefore? In a sense, we have to live vicariously. We do have to live through others. It's not through our children, though. It's through those others we see around us. Well, how do we live through them? If you take what he's saying here. Empathy? What does that mean? To feel what someone else is feeling. Should right-wing Republicans, okay, of which I am one, actually I'm more libertarian than I'm Republican, should right-wing Republicans just rail against the protesters, take that back, the rioters in Portland, Oregon? Half my family lives in Portland, they're all wacko. Okay? Why do I call them rioters? Because they're going around breaking people's cars, breaking people's windows, harming people. That's not protesting anymore. That's not demonstrating. That's rioting. That's illegal. Okay? So should right-wing Republicans say, just lock them all the hell up. Throw away the key? No. Should those rioters just say, you're all a bunch of basket of deplorables and irredeemables. You're all a bunch of racist, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, xenophobics. No. What do both sides need to do? Okay. Ancient, old American Indian prayer. Until I walk a mile in someone else's moccasins, I shouldn't judge them. Okay? It's this again. It's taking the bell that's tolling, taking the grief, the anger, the frustration somebody feels, and pretending it's yours. What would you do in their situation? Okay? If you're one of these, and Ken, sorry, I don't mean to offend. If you're one of these spoiled rich kids from Reed College in Portland, Oregon, I lived just outside Portland for 2 years. I knew people who went to Reed. They were spoiled rich kids, okay? It's one of the most expensive colleges in the country. If you can go there, you're spoiled and rich. There's no other way to put it, okay? If you're one of these spoiled rich kids whose election didn't go your way, so you're out there protesting, rioting, etc., maybe what should you do? Maybe you should think of some, take your pick, middle-aged, Midwestern mother of 5 in Wisconsin or Michigan who voted for Trump, not because she likes the way he talked 10 years ago, but because of what? What did she see going on in her life? Everything's falling apart. Where did all the jobs go in Michigan? They went away. Did they just get up and walk away, on their own? Did all those Ford plants just, decide to move one day? No. They went away because of policies of people. So maybe this person over here needs to try to understand why this person voted this way. And maybe this person over here needs to try to understand why this person voted this way. Rather than do what? You're just a fill in the blank. Okay? I mean, part of what Donne's getting at is really this. But he's really saying we need to take every situation and turn it into currency. Keep in mind, he's a preacher at this point. He's not writing poetry anymore. He's just full-bore preacher. And as I said, from here to the end of the 17th century, this is what he's known for. Preaching, right? Though this is not a sermon. It's a meditation. And there are 20-some of these. 23. Right? All right, let's turn from Donne and go to Ben Jonson, which means we have to turn back to pages, the introduction to Jonson, 717. Took way longer than I planned to on that. 717, 718. Okay? We're doing 3 or 4 poems by Jonson. Okay. Jonson's a poet and playwright. Jonson is the son of a bricklayer, meaning kind of the working poor, blue collar, okay, lower middle class. But his father does well enough that Jonson is able to go to essentially the best K through 12 in the country. He is one of the best teachers in England, a guy named Camden. Right? He does go to university, and he becomes one of the smartest people there is in terms of knowing Latin and Greek. Okay? He writes a bunch of poetry. He writes prose also. He writes about the nature of poetry and stuff. In other words, literary theory. And he writes plays. He writes comedies. He writes dramas. He's a contemporary and competitor of Shakespeare. Okay? His plays just don't rise to the level of Shakespeare. None of them do. The Volpone, the one that's in here, is pretty good. Every Man in His Humor is pretty good too. So we're going to read by Jonson, On My First Daughter, On My First Son. Those are both epitaphs. They're funeral poems. Notice what happened to his first daughter. She died early. What happened to his first son? He died early. Okay? I can't imagine being Ben Jonson. Having, your 2 eldest children die before the age of 10. And then we're going to read his dedicatory poem to the first folio. So, On My First Daughter, page 719. Here lies to each her parents Ruth. What's Ruth mean there? We don't use that word by itself anymore. We use it with an affix on the end. Ruthless. What does it mean to be ruthless? Unforgiving. Unmerciful. Uncaring. Okay? Here lies to each her parents Ruth. So what does Ruth mean there? To their forgiving? To their sorrow. Mary, the daughter of their youth. Yet all heaven's gifts being heaven's due, it makes the Father less to rue. And 6 months in, she parted hence with safety of her innocence. How young was she when she died? 6 months old. Okay? And she parted with safety of her innocence. Why? I thought if you're a good Calvinist, you're born with original sin. You're entirely depraved. You die, you go to hell. Unless you are one of the elect. He's not a good Calvinist. Okay? With safety of her innocence, whose soul, heaven's queen, whose name she bears, in comfort of her mother's tears, that line tells us he's not a good Calvinist. Because Calvinists don't believe that Mary is the queen of heaven. He's Catholic. Right? In comfort of her mother's tears, says, placed amongst her virgin train. Now, she is 6 months old, so yes, she is virgin. But Mary, Queen of Heaven, has placed little Mary amongst her followers. Right? That's what's meant by virgin train. Where, while that severed doth remain, that is, while her soul, which is in heaven, is severed from her body, before the resurrection, right? This grave partakes the fleshly birth. This is where the flesh, the carcass is, which cover lightly, gentle earth. What does he want the earth seemingly not to do? What happens to every grave? If you've been to a funeral and you've been to the gravesite service, you put the coffin in, they fill up the grave. Do they fill up the grave so the ground is like this? No, you mound it over. Why? Because this settles. And so that a year later, the ground will be flat. It's almost like he's saying, don't touch her. Just let her body remain pure. Okay? On my first son. Notice there's a poem to Donne. He and Donne shared poems back and forth. He writes several poems to Donne. Far as we know, Donne doesn't write any to him. Or he doesn't write any back. Okay? Jonson has these published, by the way. I should have mentioned that. The date at the bottom, 1616, that's when Jonson publishes. I don't think there's a picture here. That's when Jonson publishes his works. And the book is called The Works of Benjamin Jonson. Right? Which was kind of arrogant at the time, because nobody really thought of a poet or poetry as work. See, he's the first professional writer. I mean, Shakespeare was living by his writing. Yes, he was also acting. Nobody really had called what they were doing as writing work before. Other people had published stuff under their name, but it was always kind of this is what I do in my free time. This is a pastime. Jonson's essentially saying, by titling this The Works, this is what I spend all my time on. This is my bread and butter. Okay? Now look on my first son. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. Child of my right hand is the meaning behind the Hebrew name Benjamin. Okay? My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. Seems to be implying the kid died because of Jonson's sin. 7 years thou wert lent to me. Notice both poems use that language of children being loaned. Parents, we think they belong to us. Sometimes we wish they didn't, okay? But they don't. They have their own being. They belong, depending on one's religious beliefs, to God or someone else. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. That's financial language. You were loaned to me, and due date came due. The promissory note says, I don't know, fill in the date, July 31st, 1610. And I have to pay you back on this day. That is, pay you back to the loaner. Oh, could I lose all, Father, now? Notice there's no gloss for that line. What does that line mean? It's very elusive. I think one of the meanings is, I wish I'd never been a father. I mean, imagine this. I've known people who have lost their children, but I can't imagine losing, again, 2. Is he saying it would be better never to have been a father? He might be. For why will man lament the state he should envy? See, but that line then tells me that's not what he's saying. He's saying man, specifically males, should envy the state of fatherhood. They should want to become fathers. So the line, why should man lament that? Well, the lament is the previous line. Mary?
I sort of read it like, when man lament the state he should envy, like the child is in a better place, like he should be envious of that.
That's the next reading I was going to suggest. Okay? Another meaning of that line is where, let's say Jonson's theological beliefs, where is his child Benjamin now? He's in heaven with God. Why should one lament that state? Yeah, and think, well, to have so soon scaped worlds and flesh's rage, and if no other misery, yet age. In other words, 7-year-old Benjamin doesn't have to face what? Growing up. He doesn't have to face adolescence. He doesn't have to face worlds and flesh's rage. Worlds. He's talking about the problems, issues, etc. one confronts in the world. Flesh, he's talking about sexual temptation, as well as illnesses of the flesh. And then lastly, and if no other misery, what does, Hrothgar kind of get to in that homily? I'm an old man. Why does Beowulf fight the dragon when he does? I think part of it at least, better to go out on top, better to go out like a warrior than dying in a bed, mumbling, drool coming down his face, people having to change his bed sheets. Age sucks. By the way, I'll just throw that out there. Multiple knee surgeries, multiple shoulder surgeries. Need a brain surgery. Rest in soft peace. And ask, if somebody asks you, say, here lie, I love this line, Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry. What do you mean, Ben Jonson's best piece of poetry? Is he talking about this line? His poem? His son. A son isn't poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is creation. Poetry comes from the Greek word poesis. You know what it means? Something made. Poetry, because of literary conventions, however, we merely say is something made of words. may have rhyme, but it has some kind of meter, it has some kind of structure. We draw a distinction between prose and poetry. Okay? But you might come across in another course, probably you won't, only if you take another course from me, the word mythopoeic. It means a maker of myth. J.R.R. Tolkien was a mythopoeic writer. C.S. Lewis was a mythopoeic writer. George MacDonald was a mythopoeic writer. I would argue J.K. Rowling is a mythopoeic writer. Okay? George Lucas is a mythopoeic writer. Only he writes with images. Okay? Because he really is a bad writer when it comes to words. His dialogue. Man. Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry. For whose sake, henceforth, all his vows be such, as what he loves may never like too much. What in the world does that last line mean?
Don't like it. Like the neighbors.
Louder.
Like don't like the thing you love so and make it lose it.
Yeah. Don't put all of your love in one person. Why? Not because they will fail you. Not because they will do something. What were we just talking about? You don't know what's outside this door. What if your significant other, assuming you have one, all of their joy, all of their happiness, all of their raison d'etre, their reason for being is you. It's Lucy. And Lucy walks out this door and gets killed. What happens to that other person? They might as well die too, right? All of their joy and happiness is there. But he's talking about a son, not a lover. What do parents all too frequently do? Let me rephrase this. I don't know if I should ask this question. Well, go ahead. Women, how many of you are married? I think just one. Okay. How many of you think you'll be married at some point? Okay, some of you are saying yes. Do you look forward to your mom helping plan your wedding?
No.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Why not?
It's not wedding.
That's on Saturday.
Wedding, okay.
My sister's.
Okay.
She wants the wedding day like she wants for herself.
Bingo! It's mom trying to relive the glory days. Or mom what? Okay, it could be that. Trying to have the wedding she didn't have. Okay? So, what do parents often do with their children? They try to live through them. They want their child to be perfect, wonderful, great at everything. Why? Because I wasn't. And yet, so what do I have to do as a parent? Realize my sons aren't me. Just because I was good at soccer doesn't mean they're going to be. Just because I was mediocre to not mediocre at pole vaulting doesn't mean they needed to run track. Okay? But both my sons, I've got 4 kids, both my sons, I think at least when it comes to academics, they are so far ahead of me I can't even see them. Okay? They got all my wife's brains, in other words. So why not never like too much? Yeah. That as what he loves may never like too much. He's kind of saying, yes, love. But don't go over. Don't place everything on that one. Okay? Because that one will die. Maybe after you. That's what parents want. Okay? But if they die before, that's not a good thing. Okay. Turn to 723. To the memory of my beloved, the author, Mr. William Shakespeare. Okay? This big, long, dedicatory poem is prefixed to the first folio of Shakespeare. The first folio, published in 1623 by the remaining members of Shakespeare's acting company, Lord Chamberlain's men, and then after King James, the King's men, published several little poems. This is not little, by the way. This is the longer one. But they published several of these dedicatory poems, okay, before the actual book. Or not before that, as the frontispiece, the front matter to the book. And they probably had Jonson do this because he's another famous poet. He's a contemporary. He's a competitor of Shakespeare's. To draw no envy, Shakespeare, on thy name, am I thus ample to thy book in fame. Ample. I've got plenty of material. While I confess thy writings to be such as neither man nor muse can praise too much. In other words, there isn't enough praise to be said for your works. 'Tis true in all men's suffrage. Suffrage, agreement. That is, if there were an election, we would all say yes. But these ways were not the paths I meant unto thy praise. That's Jonson's way, metaphorically within the poem of saying, but that's not what I want to say. So I need to refocus. I need to get back to what I want to say. For silliest ignorance on these may light. Silliest, foolish. That is, even a stupid person could say that. Okay? Which, when it sounds at best, but echoes right. That is, the silliest ignorance. When it sounds the best, does what? It's an echo. Okay, what does he mean? They're merely echoing what the original says. So they praise Shakespeare by going, oh, Shakespeare. Drawing a complete blank. To be or not. I mean, wow, is there anything else to be said other than that? You haven't said anything, right? Or blind affection, which doth ne'er advance the truth, but gropes and urgeth all by chance. You're, in an airplane, or you're on a train, or you're riding somewhere with a group of people, and you mention, yeah, I'm taking this course on Shakespeare, and somebody goes, oh, I just love Shakespeare. And then you start asking them a bunch of questions, and it turns out they don't know diddly squat. So why did they say, oh, I just love Shakespeare? Well, because of Shakespeare. And you want to sound what? Intelligent, smart. Everybody wants to be intelligent and smart. Or crafty malice might pretend of this praise and think to ruin where it seemed to raise. In other words, kind of the damning with faint praise mentality. These examples I've just given, or as some infamous bawd or whore should praise a matron. The example I've used before. Like if, Kim Kardashian were to come out and say, oh, Mother Teresa, she's such a wholesome, pure one. And it's like, yeah, but the messenger is just really not the one you want there. Okay? But thou art proof against them. And indeed, above the ill fortune of them or the need. I therefore will begin. In other words, scratch all that, because now I'm beginning my actual praise. Soul of the age. What's the image? We talked about it yesterday, Tuesday, with one of Donne's poems. The age is what? The sphere. And Shakespeare is the soul. He's the act of intelligence, giving life to it. After all, that age is called the Elizabethan period. Elizabeth is the soul of it. But on the stage, it's called the Shakespearean period. It's one of the ways it's called, one of the things it's called. So, soul of the age, the applause, delight, the wonder of our stage. My Shakespeare rise. This is like an invocation. Shakespeare, come forth. I will not lodge thee by Chaucer or Spenser or bid Beaumont lie a little further to make thee room. What's he talking about? Westminster Abbey, Poets' Corner, already existed in 1623. They're already burying famous people who write good, to not speak well, putting them in a corner. Where's Shakespeare buried? Trinity Church, Stratford-on-Avon. He is not buried in Poets' Corner. So Jonson is saying, I'm not going to ask Chaucer or Spenser, Beaumont to move. Chaucer, Spenser, two of the greats of English literature. I'm not going to ask them to, budge over. No. Thou art a monument without a tomb. The thou he's probably speaking to is Shakespeare, the body of work, the plays. And art alive still while thy book doth live, and we have wits to read and praise to give. Notice the condition. Shakespeare is only alive when? If we're smart enough to read it and have praise to give. See, I think it's a huge problem when universities, departments of English in universities across the United States change their requirements and don't require a course in Shakespeare. Require. Every English major needs to have a course in Shakespeare. That is the requirement at hardly any departments of English around the United States. Well, why Shakespeare? Why not Emily Dickinson? Because she's not Shakespeare, that's why. She hasn't influenced English literature the way Shakespeare has. She hasn't influenced the English language the way Shakespeare has. Shakespeare, in the body of his works, Shakespeare is the first use of over 1,700 words in the English language, out of a vocabulary of fewer than 20,000 words. He's creating most of his words, seemingly, out of thin air. Need a word that doesn't show up in English until Shakespeare uses it. Exist. I could give you a whole list of them. Accommodate and accommodation. Shakespeare's the first one to use those. Does that mean he necessarily created them? No. But we don't know where he got them from otherwise. So Jonson goes on. That I not mix thee so, that is, I'm not going to mix you with Chaucer, Spenser, and Beaumont. That I not mix thee so, my brain excuses. I mean, with great but disproportionate muses. That is, they're great, but disproportionate. For if I thought my judgment were of years, I should commit thee surely with thy peers. He's to notice the soul of an age. But if you weren't the soul of an age, I would compare you with your peers. Who are his peers? And tell how far thou didst our Lily outshine. Lily, who wrote Euphues or Golden Legacy. Kind of one of the first novelists. Right? Or Sporting Kid, Spanish Tragedy. Or Marlowe, Hero and Leander, Dr. Faustus. Or Marlowe's Mighty Line. And though thou had small Latin, and that meant anti-Stratfordians or anonymous, jump on that line and say, see? They take that line to mean Shakespeare didn't know Latin or Greek. It's not what Jonson said. He said, though thou hadst small Latin. You knew a little Latin, and you knew a little bit less Greek. From thence to honor thee, from thence, who? Latin and Greek. I would not seek for names, but call forth. In other words, he's saying, I wouldn't have to sit there and go, let's see, now, who can I compare Shakespeare to in Latin and Greek? No, he immediately thinks of the biggies. Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles, the quote-unquote fathers of ancient drama. Okay? Pacuvius, Accius, him of Cordova dead, to life again. To hear thy buskin tread and shake a stage. He would call them to what? To hear Shakespeare. Or, when thy socks were on, that is, when it's comedy, leave thee alone for the comparison of all that insolent Greece or haughty Rome sent forth. You read those right? Yeah. Insolent Greece or haughty Rome sent forth, or since did from their ashes come. Triumph, my Britain, thou hast one to show, to whom all scenes of Europe homage show. In other words, all scenes of Europe, all plays that have Europe kind of as a background. What does that mean? All the ancients, and everybody up to now, all these writers would have to come up and go, oh, great and mighty Shakespeare. Oh, great and mighty Shakespeare. He was not of an age, but for all time. And all the muses still, yet then, were in their prime. That is, the muses were at their most powerful, their most efficacious, when, like Apollo, who is Apollo? God of poetry. When, like Apollo, he came forth to warm our ears, or like a Mercury messenger to charm. Nature herself was proud of his designs. That is, nature, a goddess, according to the ancients, nature said, way to go, Shakespeare, I like how you make that tree. Or I like how you design that woman. Enjoyed to wear the dressing of his lines, which were so richly spun and woven so fit, as since she will vouchsafe no other wit. In other words, Jonson is saying nature so loved Shakespeare, she doesn't inspire other writers. Among whom are Ben Jonson. This is Jonson kind of letting out a bit of his envy. Damn you, Shakespeare. The gods of poetry and writing so love you, they don't influence anybody else anymore. The merry Greek, tart Aristophanes, neat Terence, witty Plautus, they are not pleased. That is, we don't take pleasure in them now, but antiquated and deserted lie, as they were not of nature's family. In other words, they don't read like they come naturally. They're artificial. Yet must I not give nature all? In other words, he's saying Shakespeare wasn't a born writer. Shakespeare was not the kind of writer that some people have this image in their mind of. There's a guy who just sat down with a sheet of paper and said, Act 1, Scene 1. He just wrote it all out, one draft. No crossing out, no blotting. He just, perfect, first draft. No, Jonson says. No. Thy art, my gentle Shakespeare, must enjoy a part. What does he mean, thy art? All of you, you're getting ready to write a paper, or maybe some of you have started it. There is no wood in this classroom. Knock on wood. Your idea's up here, right? The idea you have in your mind, whether you admit it or not, is perfect. Whether you admit it or not, you think the idea you have is perfect. Okay? What happens when it turns into this? It may not be so perfect. Oh, I won't ascribe those feelings to you. I'll ascribe them to me. Everything I wrote up here, I thought, perfect. Down here, not so much. Okay? Because down here, what happens between here and here? Translation. Up here, I speak Greek fluently. Down here, not at all. Up here, I speak my ideas perfectly. Down here, it's like a kindergartner with a crayon. It's all just... What's Jonson getting at? Thy art, my gentle Shakespeare, must enjoy a part. First draft? No. Second draft? No. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh? How many of you have ever written a paper to 5 drafts? Okay, a couple of you nerdy ones. Wait, if any of you are playing out graduate school and you go on and you do a doctorate. If you have a good doctoral advisor, dissertation director, you will come to hate that person. I tell all the people who ask me to direct, I say, okay, I just want you to know you're going to hate me. By the time we get to that, I'm not kidding. You're going to want to vomit if you see me. Okay? Because you're going to have to go through that dissertation until I am sure, one, that not only am I pleased with it, but that the other members of the committee who I don't allow to read it until it's perfect will read it and say, this is perfect. So that means usually 10 drafts minimum. Dissertation, we're talking minimum 150 pages. Okay? Doing that 10 times, word for word. Yeah, and that does mean sometimes. Draft number 6, I'll add stuff back in that was in draft number 4. Okay? He's talking about Shakespeare's act of revision here. For though the poet's matter nature be, that is, the world and all that is in it, what? His art doth give the fashion. In that he who casts to write a living line must sweat, such as thine are, that is, Shakespeare's lines are living, they're alive, they're breathing. Must do what? Must sweat and strike the second heat upon the muse's anvil, turn the same, and himself with it that he thinks to frame. Maybe, just maybe, Jonson's talking more about himself here. See, a lot of people have taken these lines to mean, oh, Jonson is telling us, he's giving us the inside view on how Shakespeare used to work. Because they were friends. Maybe Shakespeare and Jonson over for a few beers. He said, yeah, look here's what I'm working on. And Jonson saw all the scratches through, all the rewrites. Maybe. Maybe not, though. Maybe what Jonson is really getting at is, for those of us whose writing is the work, this is the case. Maybe Shakespeare is one of those writers for whom it comes naturally. If you've never taken an 18th century course, take an 18th century course and read about Samuel Johnson. I hate Samuel Johnson because he's such a wonderful, beautiful writer, and 2, he apparently did 90% of it one-off. One draft. Like John Milton, Paradise Lost. He was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost. He dictated it to his daughters. Perfect. Just absolutely detest those kind of people. Kinds of people. Okay? Okay, it's 11:05, so we'll have to pick up there because I got sidetracked. We should still be able, I think, to finish everything on the syllabus